let's get a couple of things out of the way first. I broke my hand, okay? So you're going to be seeing this bad boy all morning. Here's the story. Friday, went snowboarding and did not break my hand snowboarding, but then after I went snowboarding, did some surfing on the Endless Wave at Silver Mountain Water Park, and I thought I was doing pretty good for the first hour, and it ended up being the last time of the day. Fell and broke my hand, so it's my middle finger, and it hurts real bad. I'm not going to lie. It's pretty swollen right now. I'm not on any pain meds because I didn't want to be super loopy for you this morning, so I'm just going to power through, but that's the story there, okay? That's the first thing we got to get out of the way. Second thing, I got to be just brutally honest with you. This is one of my least favorite Sundays of the entire year. Okay, it just is. I'm being honest with you. And it's not because I don't love seeing your smiling faces. It's because it's daylight savings time, and I got 1 hour less of sleep last night. And that just isn't right, okay? If you were here in November, I got up, and I was, like, happy. I was chipper. I was cheery. I was excited. I got an extra hour of sleep. Felt like 16 extra hours of sleep. And I was jacked. I was ready to go. Well, this is the opposite of that, right? I hate that I got 1 hour less of sleep. It feels like a ripoff, right? I changed the clocks a little early last night, and then my wife, she's like, wait, so is it 9 or is it 10? Wait, I don't understand. I'm confused, right? It's these clocks, they mess with us, right? And we hate when it moves too fast one way, right? When it jumps back the other way, that's good. I kind of feel like Flava Flav. I should just put this on. You guys getting my 90s hip-hop reference? Public Enemy? No? Okay. Some of you guys are with me. Some of you guys are like, what? Flava Flav, right? Yeah, boy. No? Okay, I'm going to put that away before it gets... just let's leave that. That's a bad idea. Why we don't like it when it jumps the other way or it moves too fast that way, right? Going back in time, that's the good one, right? Or jumping back. And I think it's super ironic that we're talking about rest on a day that most of us got 1 hour less rest than we typically do, right? Just the way it worked out. We're talking about rest. And I was reading a book this week. It's called Dare to Lead by a social worker named Brene Brown, and she does research all over the place. And she referred to time as our most precious gift. She even went as far as to say, time is hands down our most coveted, unrenewable resource. I thought that was powerful, right? That imagery that we get, and we care about our time so much. It's so valuable to us. And we always want more of it. We always wish there was more time for us to have. We place such a high value on it. As a culture, we demand more time, right? We place such a high commodity on our time to the point where I don't think we get this reality of rest. I would go as far as to say it this way. We don't rest well. We're not good at it. And I think specifically in America, I don't want to oversimplify and kind of put us all in the same category, but if we're honest for a second, right, all we have to do is look around and realize that rest isn't one of our strong suits. If you've ever traveled outside of the United States, you know that some cultures understand this a little better than others. My wife and I love to travel and have been able to travel around the world to multiple places. And we got the privilege of heading on a missions trip with our church as we sponsored a church in Colombia. Many of you sponsor children through Compassion International to Colombia and the church that we got to help plant down there. We took a group of, I believe it was 13 individuals to go visit some of our Compassion International sponsor kids to help build a bathroom at that church and continue to love that area. And it was a blast. It was life-changing. It was amazing. But it was amazing just to see a different culture and interact with people in Colombia. And there were so many things I loved about Colombia. Number one, I don't know if it's number one because you can't make a list. I feel like if I said the number one, I have to throw Jesus or something. But the top of my list is coffee. And I was as I'm saying that, I'm like, I can't say I loved coffee more than I loved loving these kids. Sounds bad about me. But hey, it's where my mind's at right now, right? I loved the coffee. Tinto is how they taught us to say just street, black coffee. It was one of the first things Scott and I, okay, I just want coffee and black. What do I say? So we were saying that all the time. Tinto. They kept giving us more delicious coffee, right? And it was amazing interacting with these people. And it was cool, at lunchtime, they got rest, right? The siesta. I feel like we need to build that into American culture. Why don't we have a siesta? We don't siesta well, right? It was funny, even when we were doing this work project, a couple of our translators and a couple of people on the trip were like, hey, you don't have to work so hard. take a rest, right? Because as a culture, they understood rest, I think, a little bit better than we do. In America, we value hard work, nose to the grind, pull yourself up by your bootstraps type entrepreneurship and enterprise. And those things are all amazing. Those are all really cool things. But if we're honest, sometimes we can find ourselves lacking the rest that we need. Like, think about it for a sec. Think about it like for even personally. How rested do you feel right now? And I'm not just even talking about like, did you get enough sleep or the 1 hour less really messing with you? Like, when's the last time you took a good nap or a siesta, right? But no, really, how rested do you feel? And I think that we can compare and contrast some of these ideas in our life because we've felt what rested feels like. We've been in those places where we felt peace and rest and stillness. But on the other hand, and maybe more often than not, we find ourselves running around burdened and weary and anxious and unrested. Just think about how often you ask someone the question, how are you doing? And they respond with something like, I'm tired, I'm busy, right? It's amazing. I read this statistic the other day. Over 40% of Americans, so almost half, over 40% of Americans admit to waking up and still being tired. Right? Even literal rest doesn't make us feel rested. I'm in that boat. I'm not a morning person, right? I wake up and I'm tired. I go to bed and I'm tired. I need coffee at 2 o'clock. I'm like, what's wrong with this picture? I'm like always tired, right? Why do we always feel this continual, perpetual restlessness in our lives? And I think we don't rest well. And I think there's multiple reasons why. And one of the big things I think we're seeing in our culture and our society more than ever is this truth, is that we don't disconnect well. We don't disconnect well. Life is loud, it's fast. Our world and our culture travel at a high velocity. There is so much going on, so much to hear and process. It seems like we're in a rush all of the time, and we're always connected, unable to unplug and disconnect. Craig made this point really well last week as he was sharing on some of the practical ways in which we find rest. I don't know if it was on purpose or not, but First Gathering, he literally got distracted by his phone. So if you were in here, I don't think that was like a sermon illustration. I think it was legitimately just distraction from his phone, right? But we all find ourselves doing that. I read some statistics this week that just kind of blow my mind. I saw that 58% of people don't go one waking hour without checking their phone. 58% of people won't go one waking hour without checking their phone. 59% of people check email as it comes in, and 89% of people check it daily on vacation, when we're supposed to be resting, when we're supposed to be disconnected. 84% of people believe they couldn't go one day without their phone. The vast majority of people believe they couldn't go one day without their phone. The average teenager spends 11 hours a day on some sort of electronic device. 11 hours a day. That's mind-blowing, right? This one is crazy to me. One in five people would rather go without shoes for 1 week than without their phone. Without shoes for 1 week than without their phone, right? Walking around barefoot, but like, hey, at least I got my phone. That's crazy. All of this connectivity is great, and technology is amazing, and we are in a world where it's mind-blowing how much technology has done for us. But if we're honest, all of this connectivity is making it harder than ever to disconnect and find real, deep, meaningful rest. But today, I want to focus on a deeper level of rest than just unplugging, than just turning off our phones. I want to talk about more than just physical rest. That's important, and Craig set up this series really well last week, talking about some of the boundaries and some of the things we can do very practically in our lives to rest well. But there's a depth to rest that often goes unnoticed, uncultivated, and that's a rest for our souls. So I want to talk to you this morning about soul rest, about rest for your soul. Because we have a soul. And I think no matter where we find ourselves today, and I don't pretend to know your story or what's going on or even the things that you're struggling with, but I know that deep inside of us there is an inner us. We have an invisible personality and being that is actually more real than our visible, tangible bodies. Even if we can't define it, we know that there is something on the inside. We are more than simply the sum of our body parts and our brain synapses. There is something deep in us that makes us us. My soul is the center of who I am. It's the inner me, the real me, the invisible me. that transcends the physical me, the part of me that will live for eternity, my soul. So if this soul thing is so important, how do we find rest? How do we find the rightness for that soul that is so massively important for who we are and how we live our lives? Well, I bet that you could guess that God has a lot to say about that. The creator of your soul has a lot to say about how you can take care of it and how you can find rest well in your soul. In fact, Jesus said these words to his followers, and that would echo to us today in Matthew chapter 11. I'm going to read my Bible with one hand. Got it. Sweet. Matthew chapter 11, starting in verse 28, Jesus says this. He says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light." That's such a beautiful picture and such beautiful news for us this morning. We have to understand this truth, that a relationship with Jesus will result in rest for your soul. Jesus says, "Come to me. I have everything you need in the busyness, in the craziness, in the chaos, in the heaviness, in the weight of life. I have rest for your soul." Following him, he says, "Come and follow me," and the natural response will be rest for your soul. It's a cause and effect. It's an action and reaction. Jesus invites us to experience real and supernatural soul rest. Man, that's good news. We don't need more time, right? We don't need more hours in the day. We don't need something else. Jesus has everything we need, and he's offering it to us. He just says, "Come," and rest will be for your soul. That seems counterintuitive to some of us maybe today, or some people I think in the world in general. That idea seems counterintuitive. If we polled people, or if we just began to ask people, and maybe you ask people in relationships, what they view a relationship with Jesus like, or what they think about when they think about religion or God or a relationship with God, I think many answer things like rules and morals, about keeping the 10 Commandments, about behaving the right way, about being a good person, about doing all of these things that make us feel good or make us in right standing before God. Some people might even feel guilty, like, "Oh, I haven't been to church enough. I haven't been to church in a long time. I feel some sort of guilt or some sort of shame because maybe I'm not right before God." See, I don't think a lot of people would say a relationship with God is about enjoying God, enjoying life, nature, good food, friends, rest, peace, and stillness. That when we ask about who God is, that we would say, God is a God who wants rest for my life. I don't think that's the first thought for many people. And maybe it is for you, and that's awesome, and maybe you're getting there, but I think that if we look around, again, that's not our first knee-jerk reaction as we understand who God is and who God wants to be in us and how God wants us to experience life. But that's exactly what Jesus says here. If you want a calm, quiet, restful soul, you have to recognize that you are not in control. Again, it's the opposite of what we think usually. We assume that if we lack rest, if we lack peace, then the answer is to be more in control of our fate. If we could just prepare a little better for the future, if we had just a little more money in the bank, if we had just a little more safety nets, if we had just a little more time, I wouldn't feel so stressed. I wouldn't have as much anxiety. And then maybe my soul would find rest. We equate eternal control with inner rest. Or maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm speaking to myself. I'm a self-proclaimed control freak. Okay? You could ask my wife. Actually, don't ask my wife. That's a bad idea. She'd probably overshare and have lots of things to say. I like being in control. I do. I like driving on road trips. I'm like, yeah, we're good. I'll drive for 18 hours. You can just sit in the passenger seat, right? I don't like not being in control. I'm working on it, right? I'm admitting it to you today. I was on vacation a few weeks ago. My wife and I took a short trip down to San Antonio, Texas. And like I said earlier, we travel a lot. I would consider us good travelers. We get the system right. We work in it. We fly a lot. And I'm good at flying. I got the whole thing. And I was watching some movies and working on some stuff with my iPad and my keyboard and all that kind of stuff. And it was a smaller plane, and the lady in front of me decided she wanted to recline, which she's totally you're capable to do that. Right? That's the rules. You're allowed to, like, no harm, no foul. But I feel like there's some courtesy, right? And like normally you kind of give the head nod, like, hey, I'm coming back. Right? Or at least like, oh, is this good? She just went like 0 to 60 like that. She was like, I'm coming back whether you like it or not, right? I got my drink there. I got my laptop there. And it's just like, boom. And then it's like, I got to catch everything and make sure I'm not dying, right? And then I'm frustrated because now I'm not in control of my space, right? You already don't have enough space on an airplane. And now little Miss Recliner in front of me thinks that her space is more valuable than me. And I was frustrated. I look at my wife and she's like, I know, right? I'm at that place. I feel like I can taste her shampoo. It's like, your hair is here. It's too close. I'm not okay with it. I was frustrated. I was angry because I was not in control, and my wife knew. She could just see it all in my face, and she was like, it's going to be okay. I'm like, it's not going to be okay because I'm not in control, right? And we flew out of Spokane, and they had to de-ice the plane, so we're late and all that kind of stuff, and we had a connection in Salt Lake City, and it was like an hour, and then with the de-icing, all that kind of stuff, it was going to be pretty close. So we had one of those, scenarios where we had to run through the airport, which is always awesome. So I told my wife, hey, you go down and make sure that they don't leave without us. We were in the small plane, so we had to get our bags, our carry-ons, wait for those, get them, and go. So I'm like, I'll get the bags, you go. So I'm sprinting through the airport with 2 bags, right, which is always super fun. Get to the gate. We made it on, barely, right? They're doing the last call thing. We get on, relief, sit on the plane, and then we sit at the gate for another 40 minutes. I'm like, are you kidding me? I just sprinted. I'm sweating. I probably got BO, right? I'm like, I'm frustrated, and now we're sitting here, and they give 0 information. 0. Not even like, hey, we'll let you know. The pilot comes on and goes, I got no clue what's going on. I'm like, aren't you the guy who's supposed to know what's going on? You got 0 information? So we sit there for 40 minutes. And again, I just look at my wife, and she knows. Like, you're frustrated because you're not in control, right? Oh, I don't like it. I sat in the minor emergency for 3.5 hours on Friday. Like, that's not fun. I feel like I did pretty good on that one. I wasn't rude to any of the doctors. I was chatting it up with the nurses. But I don't like not being in control. Maybe it's just me, but I think that there's a lot of life that we live like that we think the solution to the problem is that if I were in control, I could at least know what's going on, and I could at least navigate a little better. So when we read things like Matthew 11 that says, Jesus says, I don't need you to do anything. I just need you to come, and I got it taken care of. I will give you rest. You can't create this rest. You can't manufacture this rest on your own. I have it for you. Just come. The truth is that rest is found not in control, but in surrender. Is God really God in our lives? Do we actually believe that He is in control and that He loves us? If so, then we don't have to play God. We don't have to be in control. We can let Him be God. It's His job. And He's really, really good at it. He's a lot better at it than I am, right? Even though I think I could do a better job sometimes, right? Even if I could fly the plane, at least I'd have more information. That'd be a bad idea, right? God is a good God. And He not only offers, but He promises to deliver rest for your soul. There's so many times where we walk around stressed, overloaded, burdened, tired, angry, and our souls are in a state of restlessness. Jesus simply says, come to me. I've got you. I've got it under control. I want to give you rest for your soul. Let me use another example that I think will help paint a picture for this beautiful relationship that God has for us as He ushers us into rest for our soul. And it's a picture painted by David in one of the maybe the most famous Psalms written in the Bible. It's Psalm 23. There's actually in our bumper video there, that guy that was talking about it is kind of putting me to sleep a little bit, that was saying some things about rest. He quotes a few of Psalm 23. You'll probably recognize it. It's super popular. It's not just in there. Coolio, again, more 90s hip-hop for you. Coolio sampled Psalm 23 in his hit Gangsta's Paradise. I'm just throwing out a lot of 90s hip-hop references today. Sorry, not sorry, okay? Like, it's who I am. So if you have no idea what I'm talking about, listen to some Coolio or some Public Enemy. But don't say, hey, my pastor recommended that I go listen to this stuff. Parental advisory. There's a sticker on it, okay? I don't know where. 90s hip-hop's just going to get me all thrown off this morning, starting with Anyway, Psalm 23. It's the Bible. Coolio did not write this. A guy named David did. Psalm 23, verse 1. The Lord is my shepherd. I have all that I need. He lets me rest in green meadows. He leads me beside peaceful streams. He renews my strength. He makes me rest. He lets me rest. God creates this environment. And I love this picture. David says, God lets us rest. And it's not this picture like God lets us rest, like a good boss lets us take a break when we're tired, right? Other translations use this idea that God makes me rest. God makes me rest. And it's not like God's poking us in the chest and saying, hey, I'm God and you need to rest. No, he lovingly tells us, I've created a restful place for you to deal with your restlessness. God creates opportunities. He creates environments. He literally built life in order to give us rest. Very simply, God makes rest possible. He makes it a reality. This depth of soul rest. God makes it possible. And David is painting this picture of green meadows and peaceful streams, a utopia that is just built for rest. And he says, this is my God who's created these environments for me. And most of us recognize who David is, and you might recognize David as the boy who killed Goliath, or you might recognize David as this mighty warrior or a king. But before David was any of those things, he was a shepherd. He hung out with sheep. And I would have to assume that David was a pretty good shepherd. He was one of the best kings of all time. So he was probably a pretty good shepherd. He probably knew what it takes to be a good shepherd. He probably saw it done wrong a few times. And so he's painting this picture of God as a good shepherd. Did you know that you can't make a sheep rest? You can't force a sheep to rest. Unlike some animals, right, that you can create this, you can just make them rest, or you can just throw them in a crate and they'll rest just because they're tired or whatever, right? My wife and I have a Border Collie Blue Heeler, and I feel like I can tell her to go lay down. Again, maybe it's my control freak, like I'm alpha. I tell my wife all the time, I'm the alpha! She has to obey me. And she doesn't do anything that I say. I'm like, oh, I'm not. I'm just, do whatever you want, right? It's control freak in me. I'm like, sit! Right, but there's certain animals that will just rest out of necessity. But sheep are interested in the fact of their very makeup. It's almost impossible for them to be made to lie down and rest unless certain requirements are met. They refuse to lie down unless they're free from fear, from tension, from pests and hunger. As long as there is even the slightest suspicion of danger from any predator, from any distraction, from flies, from pests, they stand up and they won't lie down and rest because they're ready to flee for their lives. Think about it. A sheep has little to no means of defense. They're helpless. They're timid. They're feeble. And their only recourse is to run. So if they do not feel safe, they won't lie down. They won't feel that rest. They won't feel that rest in their soul and they're who they are. They can't. They're scared. They're ready to run. They're ready to move. And much as you might not feel like a sheep this morning, that sounds pretty familiar to me. You might not have trouble sleeping and lying down physically, but that tension that comes from anxiety and the worry of life is keeping your soul from being at rest the way God wants you to be. Fear, frustration, anxiety, depression, anger, and hurt. All of these things keep our soul from experiencing rest. But David is telling us there is hope. We have a shepherd, a good shepherd who takes care of us. He is not only just a shepherd, he is the good shepherd. He creates a place for us to rest. He makes rest a reality. See, we have the ultimate shepherd. We don't have to live in fear. We don't have to have restlessness. See, on the other side, when a sheep knows how secure it is, when it knows that it's safe, when it knows that there's a watchful eye from a shepherd that it trusts, and it is healthy, and there's food nearby, streams to drink, green meadows, it will rest. it will lie down and rest. When a shepherd provides a good environment for his sheep, he doesn't have to make a sheep rest. A sheep will rest because it knows that it is safe. And David says, my God is a good shepherd. He makes rest possible. He creates an environment for me to find rest in my soul. Do you know how safe you are this morning? The Word of God says that God is your fortress. He is your strong tower. He is your hiding place. Do you know how close you are to God? Do you know how watched you are by God? The Word of God says that He watches over us. He will keep us from harm. He never sleeps and He never slumbers. Do you know how known you are by God? He numbers the hairs on your head. He knit you together. You are His workmanship, His masterpiece. Do you know how provided for you are? God promises to provide for all of our needs. Not some of our needs, not when things feel right, not when God feels like it, all of our needs. That's what a good shepherd does. That is such good news for us today and should help us get to a place of rest despite our circumstances, despite our feelings, that we understand that God is a good shepherd creating a safe environment for us, protecting us, keeping us safe, and providing for us. When we reflect on that, when we understand that and let that define us, when we live in that, all of a sudden the things that are robbing us from our rest don't seem to have that same craziness in our life. They don't seem to have those teeth anymore that scare us because God is bigger. When we understand that our shepherd can create a good environment, we can lie down and rest. God makes rest possible. Then why is it that we find ourselves trying to numb ourselves with substances, with relationships, with possessions? We think that if we have enough fill in the blank, that we will be rested, we will be at ease. Whatever it is, we try to manipulate rest and manipulate peace. I think our typical fix when we face problems on the outside is to double our efforts. Right? When the pressure gets, when the things get hot, when pressure's on, we tend to just double our efforts and go even harder. Right? If I could just fix this. We fall into that trap that if we can be more healthy, wealthy, popular, productive, influential, then we'll be good. So it throws us into this chase, thinking that internal happiness will come from external success. But we have to get to a place where we say, God alone can provide rest for our soul. I can't make me rest. I can't create a good enough environment on my own. I have to look to my shepherd who is providing for me. Jesus, who says in Matthew 11, what you're carrying is too much for you to carry. I have a burden that is light. I have a rest for your soul. You're not going to get there on your own, so just stop trying. God alone can rest. In my own hands, in my own wisdom, in my own experience, I'm not going to be able to find rest for my soul, but God can. And for some of us in the room this morning, that's not new information. Like, I get it. I understand that. That's a place where I need to get to, a place that I need to work on. For some of you, maybe that is brand new information or a revelation this morning of what God has for you and how you viewed God. That He is a God who wants nothing more than rest for your soul, rightness for your life, and it's found in Him. But I think for every single one of us, we see that and we go, okay, what's next? Where's the step for me? What do I need to do? And I think we can overcomplicate it sometimes. I think the step is actually pretty simple. That we would just practice being still. That we would practice being still. In the chaos and the craziness of life, stillness does not happen enough. And it can be frightening. Right? Parents in the room, you're like, stillness is a bad thing, right? Something's going on if we can't hear what they're doing, right? It's like the calm before the storm. Where'd they go? What are they doing? What are they planning, right? Many times we find ourselves so overloaded that we experience stillness and we don't even know what to do with it. It's just so awkward. We don't practice planning stillness in our lives and setting time apart just to be still. Psalm 46, verse 10, maybe you know it, simply says that we would be still and know that I am God. That's what God says. He says, just be still. Just be still and know that I am God. This word still in the Hebrew language, it has this same connotation, the same idea for words used like slacken, right? That we wouldn't be so wound up, that we would release the tension, that we would release the slack in our lives. I get a picture of just a rope that's bound so tight, that's so strung, so tight that it's about to snap. And God says, just be still. Lean into me today. Be still and know that I am God. Isn't it beautiful that we don't have to experience God in this mountaintop craziness, chaotic flames and fire and massive, all that stuff. God can do that, but isn't it amazing that we can experience Him and know Him in the stillness? That we would just be still before Him. That it's the unwinding, the unloosening of our tensions. Isn't it amazing that God creates those atmospheres for us? That we would this week practice being still. That we would get rid of the distractions. Maybe get rid of technology that's in our way. Step away from some other people, the stress, the craziness of life, and be still. I shared some of this that was on my heart with our youth students, our middle school and high school students a few weeks ago. And my wife, who leads one of our middle school small groups, shared with her girls just the importance, and she set a timer on her phone for 60 seconds. And she said, we're just going to be still for 60 seconds. For middle school girls, right? 60 seconds. We're just going to be still. So she set her timer. And for 60 seconds, they didn't talk. They were still. And I said, how did that go? And she said at the end of 60 seconds, she turned her stopwatch off, and they were all amazed. And they said, that was amazing. That was awesome. That was refreshing. They don't experience that in their lives. They don't practice that, to be still just before God with nothing else, no agenda, just being still. Can we still our souls this week? Have the discipline not to be mastered all the time by something that was never meant to master us? That we would be able, by the power of Christ, to just to contemplate His goodness and be still and know that He is God. Be still and know who He is. To be still and embrace His goodness. Enjoy the beauty of a moment with the God who created you to love Him and be loved by Him. That we would rest in the Lord, our good shepherd. That we would rest in His promises, in His provision, in His faithfulness. That whatever we're dealing with today, whatever burden we have, we would come to the feet of Jesus and say, you know what, Jesus, this is too much for me. I've been trying too long on my own to do this. I don't need to carry this anymore. You have it. I'm coming to you. I want to find my rest in you, not in my control, not in my possessions, not in my relationships. I give it to you. And I want to experience rest the way that you have for me, for my soul. In Him, we can find rest. He has created an environment for rest. He provides for us, protects us, and calls us to be still and find rest in Him. We have a good shepherd who's created for you an environment of rest. Would you just join me in being still this week so we're aware of who He is? Jesus, I thank you so much for who you are. I thank you so much for what you've given each.